Good afternoon and welcome to St Peter Mencroft, to those of you here and those of you watching online. I'm Fiona Haworth, the Associate Priest, and this is part of our series reflecting on where we find meaning and purpose. Today our focus is the city and community, and I'd like to spend some time reflecting on the way in which our understandings of the world have changed over the time that this church has stood in this place. St Peter Mencroft stands on the site of an earlier church, so there has been a church here for close to 1,000 years. Work on the current building began in 1430, and it was consecrated 25 years later. Nestled in the shelter of St Peter Mencroft is the market, which has existed alongside the church down the centuries, and beyond the market is the Guildhall, a little older than this church. And standing above it all to the east of us here is the castle. It is fascinating to stand in the doorway of the City Council building that looks over the market and see how the castle is framed, standing above the city centre, with the market below it, flanked by the Guildhall and St Peter Mencroft, the triumvirate of state, civic and religious institutions that would have loomed so large in the lives of the people in the 15th century. As we reflect on the centuries that have passed, there is much that is the same now as it was when this church was newly consecrated. People then, as now, would be going about their daily lives, concerned with the sort of things that preoccupy us today. They would be worried about health, fearful of plague, as we are of COVID-19, concerned about making ends meet, worried for the future of their children. But the world they inhabited was in many ways different from our own. They lived in what has been described as an enchanted world. That is a world in which God was actively and directly involved, in which the angels depicted in the roof timbers above me were beings that could and did intervene in human lives, and people were vulnerable to the actions of spirits, both good and evil. It was a world in which there were no tidy boundaries between the sacred and the profane. Everywhere had the potential to be infused with the divine. People would go to holy wells, a roadside shrine, have an altar in their home. And because of this blurring of boundaries, the church was not restricted to special holy events, but would have been where community celebrations were held, with feasting, dancing and music for feasts or wakes, all taking place in the nave of the church. I wonder what great festivities this church witnessed in its first century of life. The rituals of faith were also carried out in daily life. We know that candles blessed at Candlemas were taken home and lit at times of need through the year. And people believed that they could access divine power without the need for clerical intervention by using rituals to bring divine order into the chaos of daily life. God was, of course, the ultimate source of all divine power, but access to it was not limited to a special priestly caste of people. There was, however, a clear hierarchy, a sacred ordering in which God was the pinnacle, and power was dispersed in a cascade descending to earth. The buildings that border this marketplace, this church, the Guildhall, the castle, were part of the hierarchy of institutions that reinforced the strict societal ordering of the day. Whilst our anxieties and hopes today might be all too recognisable to the people worshipping here in 1500, Our understanding of the world is quite different. In the 15th century, it would have been virtually impossible to not believe in God. Today, belief is one option amongst many. We live in a world that has been described as haunted by the absence of the divine. The novelist Julian Barnes writes, "I don't believe in God, but I miss him." Just as the necessity of belief has been eroded, so too has trust in institutions, particularly in the West. In the aftermath of the First World War, as Spanish flu was at its height, W.B. Yeats wrote a poem, The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what ruffed beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. This poem seems to speak to our times. It explores the sense of a world at sea, innocence lost, and a yearning for something better than what is on offer. It offers a lament for what has passed, the rupture of traditional family and societal structures, the loss of collective religious faith, and with it the collective sense of purpose. It carries the feeling that the old rules no longer apply and there's nothing to replace them. Nor is there anything to hope for. The rough beast awakened is one that will bring further horror to the world. Looking back a century after it was written, we might recognize it as a prophetic word. So where might we look for meaning and purpose in the light of so much uncertainty? We no longer live in a world in which an appeal to the divine, to put things right in spite of us, is conceivable or even desirable. But we do know that we have the ability to shape things for good or for evil. We can all get involved in campaigns and democratic processes. We can call for politicians to take seriously our concerns to do things differently, to build back better. We can draw on the resources of faith and the great religious traditions of the world as we look for inspiration to shape a better world for ourselves and for our children and their children. God is no less present to us than he was to the people who built this church, the Guildhall and the castle. but our understanding of the world has changed. We are no longer at the mercy of things we do not understand and cannot control. The God-given gifts of education and learning, science and technology, art and the humanities, all open up possibilities for redeeming the world if we can only turn them to serving the loving purposes of God and of each other. God is present in the world, working in and through the people around us, in and through people like us. God is present in the efforts to improve human and animal lives, in caring for this planet Earth. God is present in the acts of kindness that take place on our streets every day, in the cups of coffee bought for the homeless, in welcoming strangers, in food donated to the food bank, in buying shopping for a neighbour, in supporting local businesses, in feeding the birds, in planting seeds. If we cannot call on the angels in the roof to come down and help us, we can instead be angels to those around us. Loving God, help us to see you at work in the world in the kindness and compassion of others. Help us to join in and work with you in the world, sharing your love with others, that together we may build a kingdom in which all life may live with dignity and freedom. Amen.